There we go. Now we're officially underway. So welcome everyone to our Heart Connect session, lessons learned from Losing Danny with co-founder Petra Schulz. So first off, I would like to start by asking Susie, who is our Indigenous liaison with Stronger Together Canada team, to bring a land acknowledgement to start us off. Go ahead, Susie.
I'll start with some words in Cree, in my language. Isamandu, Gananaskamitanana, Noskagisaga. Sawenaminan, Gamino Bematia. Wichihinan, Ganawenimanan, Anos Wabake, Egamata Tugisaga. Wichihinan, Ganawenimanan, Ninanan, Bakano, Ichawas Masa. Squewa, Ewanabera. Minanan and Anosawan, Egomino Machi Hoan. So we just want to acknowledge the ancestral territory of the nations that were here on these lands. We want to acknowledge the 600 plus nations that have been here since time immemorial. Unique and distinct societies with their own languages, systems of governance, who were deeply connected to the land, who saw themselves as a part of creation and took care of themselves, took care of their communities and all that was needed. They knew the land, they knew the waters, the skies, the patterns of the weather, patterns of the animals. And so we give thanks for all that they knew and still know. We give thanks for the ancestral story, truth, and wisdom from the Indigenous nations of the East, the South, the West, the North. As the story unfolded, we turn full circle back to the East and we acknowledge all the nations who live here now and call this place home. Those who came as guests, visitors, immigrants, newcomers, refugees. We acknowledge each one of our stories and how it is connected to the Indigenous worldview that was happening here prior to contact. We acknowledge each of our journeys, each of our stories, our experiences, and we give thanks for this opportunity to come together, to learn, to share, and to be together. And so I say, Egwasane Nananaskaman, Gachkanona Wakamagan. Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you, Susie. Awesome. It's always nice to have a resident knowledge keeper that we can learn from on in every conversation. So thank you very much. All right, so today's format is going to be that we're going to give our presenter, Petra, a good chunk of time to present and share her story and anything else that she would like to share with us. And then we are going to, if you have any questions or comments or anything, please pop them into the chat and I will make sure then that we will give Petra those questions one at a time. So nobody has to worry about talking, just Petra to be able to make sure she's clear. I'll be sharing her slide deck with everyone afterwards as well. So that'll be coming from myself or Antoinette. And we will, make sure you have a copy of the slides. So if there is anything like that you're wanting to be able to, maybe a quote or anything like that, don't worry, you're going to get a copy of it. So at this point in time, I would like to turn the floor over to Petra, one of our co-founders for Mom Stop the Harm.
Thank you for that, Tyler. And Susie, thank you for that beautiful, beautiful land acknowledgement. I'm deeply moved every time I hear you speak about the land and the people and the land that we are graciously allowed to be on as uninvited guests. I'm in Misquitches-Waskahaikan Treaty 6, colonially known as Edmonton and Métis Region 4, and we are all treaty people here. I'm deeply honored that so many of you choose to spend your Saturday morning or Saturday lunchtime or Saturday afternoon, wherever you are in Turtle Island, with me. And I'm also honored to see that my fellow board members are here. I see Tammy from Winnipeg and the board candidate Ruth from Ottawa. I see people from our team for Stronger Together Canada. I see fellow advocates from Alberta have decided to join, and I'm deeply grateful for that as well. And I'm most moved and emotional to see the name of one of Danny's best friends. They went to kindergarten together and were friends till the end, really. Yeah. All right, Tyler, do you want to share the slides? So what I want to talk about, lessons learned from moving and losing Danny, is really Danny's story and what I have learned from it, and how his story informs what we do at Mom Stop the Harm. Next slide, Tyler. Why do we share our stories? Just move one ahead, Tyler. Yeah, thanks. I share my story, and so many others, fellow co-founders and so many advocates share our story, because so much of what happens in drug policy is just based on morals, on societal standards, on beliefs, but not the evidence. And it's really, really hard for people to listen to the evidence. But if you open their hearts, we have a way of opening their minds. And I encourage you, I know many of you, most of you have lived experience and have a story. Tell your story. You don't need a fancy slideshow. You can just speak from the heart, or you can contact me and I give you my slides, whichever you'd like. Speak from the heart. Find a group, a community group, your book club, a church group, wherever, a school your child attended, wherever you find an audience. If you find it in your heart, speak. It's scary at first. It's emotional. You will cry after you speak. The next day you will feel like you ran a marathon, but I tell you, it's worth it. This is how we bring about change. So me sharing Danny's story today and my story is not just about what I have learned, but hopefully also to inspire you. Next slide, please. The call that changed our life forever came in January 2011 from our youngest son, Danny. He was attending culinary school in Vancouver at the time, and without much of a lead up, he told me that he was taking drugs and had so for some time. It must have been hard for him to be truthful about his struggles, but the fact that his boyfriend had left him meant he had no home, and since he had spent his student loan, he had no money and he had to drop out of school. Next slide. When he arrived back in Edmonton, Danny started the cycle of detox and relapse. Every time the drugs were out of his system, we thought we could get the old Danny back, the kid who made us laugh, preferred an old typewriter or a computer and loved vintage car over a computer and loved vintage cars. We learned the hard way that this is not how substance use work, and that many struggles were ahead of us. It was painful and terrifying to witness the withdrawal. I thought Danny would do anything to avoid that, but the cravings remained long after the drugs had cleared out of his system. And most of all, the underlying problems had not gone away. In retrospect, I understood that he was living with multiple risk factors. He struggled with social anxiety, and as a gay teen has experienced bullying in high school. He had a learning disability, and that contributed to his difficulties with impulse control and anticipating consequences of his actions. So often I asked him, Danny, what were you thinking? And his reply was, I wasn't really thinking at all. I just did it. You actually go two ahead, Tyler. Sorry. Danny had been self-medicating his social anxiety, starting with prescription drugs he obtained illicitly. When he could not get those anymore after OxyContin was reformulated to make it tamper-proof, he moved on to more dangerous street drugs. Once I asked Danny why he used, and the answer was eye-opening. He said, after I take one of those pills, I can walk into any room and I can be who I am. Most of us use substances. I have a cup of tea right next to me. Most of us don't use substances problematically. But people like Danny who struggle with substance use drugs because of physical and emotional pain, including trauma. People don't use to feel happy, but they use to relieve their severe distress. Next slide.
Sorry, just the slide advancement is a little bit slow, so I am trying to keep up with you.
Yeah, we are on the one where he's looking into a puddle. The computer is slow. In conversation we had about Danny, my husband Rick said to me, we might lose him. He might die. Oh, no way, I replied. We got this. He will be okay. In our family, I'm the person who jumps into overdrive when something goes wrong. I believe this could be overcome. And I thought we could keep him safe. The information the health system gave us was not helpful. Nobody explained how opioid dependence work, how treatment should actually look like. And nobody at that time, nobody spoke about harm reduction, about keeping people safe and as healthy as possible with judgment, without judgment and without shame. There is so much we did not know. We are now on the slide with a photo. On the naloxone slide, actually, the naloxone slide. Hello. Sorry about that. You have internet issues?
It just seems to want to be just super, super slow. So that's why I just stopped sharing and then resharing. So not trying to interrupt you, just trying to keep it going for you.
Yeah, the naloxone one. Oh, now we're moving along. Good.
Okay. Yeah.
I learned about naloxone, the antidote that can reverse an overdose after Danny died. Now I carry a kit in my purse all the time. So often I imagine what it would have been like to have the privilege to save his life. I know many of you have reversed overdoses, and I understand the strain that comes with that. And about the worry, what would happen if you are not there. But it is a tool that is so important, and it's a privilege we have. For us, with Danny, it got worse before it got better. He moved back to Vancouver and he was living with friends and continued to use drugs. In essence, he was homeless, but thankfully not on the street. A person who uses opioids like Danny does develops tolerance, and feeling good and positive is replaced by just avoiding the pain and the withdrawal system and relieving that distress that Danny felt. Danny needed higher doses and he needed faster ways to get the drugs into his system. So he started to inject. During this time, we had little contact. And as you can imagine, I had a lot of sleepless nights. In 2012, when Danny was still living on the street, living on the coast with friends, a friend convinced him to start treatment with methadone. And that helped him put his life back together. Next slide. We had the joy of experiencing our youngest the way we knew him. He found a job in one of Edmonton's best restaurants and an apartment close to work. He came home on Sunday for dinner, and one of my favorite images of Danny is him sitting in the kitchen sharpening my knives. A good chef always keeps his knife sharp, and Danny kept mine that way. I so regret never taking a photo of him sitting at my table that way, but it's imprinted in my mind. And you see the photos here That is Danny in his apartment. He like kind of mid-century furnishing, which we got from a local thrift store here. It's him cooking in my kitchen and finishing off eggnog at Christmas. The last Christmas we had the joy to spend with him. Just putting some final touches on it. Sadly, Danny did not give his treatment enough time. He quit the psychologist because it interfered with work hours. If you have the lunch shift and the boss asks you to stay on for dinner, you won't say that you need time off for your substance use.
Do you have any towels that need to go in? Towels?
He did not stay on methadone long enough.
Towels?
Cheryl, could you mute yourself, please? Sorry. He did not stay on methadone long enough to stay stable. We had falsely assumed that methadone was just another drug or just another opioid, and we encouraged him to taper. Definitely too soon. We wanted the old Danny back, and we did not understand. For opioid substitution to work, the person has to be stable, and some people stay on it for life and never taper. We do not expect people with other health conditions to live without their meds. But when it comes to substance use, we make what we call clean the gold standard, often with tragic consequences. In the end, Rick's fearful prediction came true. Danny relapsed. He bought one more pill, which was sold as street oxy at the time, but in fact was fentanyl. It had emerged on the market after the reformulation of oxy. On April 30th, 2014, Danny died alone in his apartment he had so carefully furnished only a few months before. Danny was 25 years old. After Danny died, we had many difficult decisions to make, decisions our family was not prepared for. And one of the most important questions was what to say about the cause of his death. Do we tell the truth? How do we find words? And I'm sorry if this slide is upsetting to some of you. I actually replaced it. And in my talks to general audiences without lived experience, I actually use a slide from the funeral. And I'm very thankful that I replaced it because I know Danny's friend who's here remembers all too well. She was there. When we were prepared for the funeral, we learned that giving an eulogy means speaking well of someone. And it was clear to us that if you speak well of someone, you don't tell lies. How Danny lived and how he died, that was part of him, and we told the full story. Danny's friends, family, everyone was surprised. Not even his grandparents knew that he was using, and they're very upset for hiding that from them. Substance use is often a hidden condition, and Danny was a master of disguise. So many people came forward out of our circle of friends. Colleagues were also affected, neighbors, friends. Where had these people been? I asked myself, but I recognized they had been just where we were. They had suffered in silence because of the stigma. Substance use can happen to any family, and overdose does not discriminate. Next slide, Tyler. When the numbers continued to climb and there was no action from government, I started to reach out to health officials and the media. The chief medical officer at the time in Alberta wrote back to me, we are working on a strategy. And I was so angry. I said, while you strategize, people are dying. It seems still happening that way. The other thing I did is reaching out to media, and these are some of the clippings from some of the early news reports. Through these media stories, I met like-minded women, Leslie McBain and Lorna Thomas, and it felt like the first time somebody understood how I was feeling and how they were saying. They shared my pain, but also my desire for change, and together we formed Moms Stop the Harm. you know that we are a network of families across Canada. We are now 3,500 families strong. And here I put in a little plug, and Tyler will send out the link later and also put it in the chat. If you have not signed up on our new database, because we are not 3,500 in our new database, please go to Better Impact and sign up. You can do so by just going to our website as if you're joining again, but we know you're not a new join. We just moved to a database to make it more secure. So you know what our mission is. We want to advocate to end substance use related stigma, harm, and death. But in addition to our advocacy, of course, we also provide peer support. This is one of the early collages we show. These are some of the many loved ones our members lost. If you go to our website, look at our loved ones, you'll be stunned at the hundreds and hundreds of photos there. Substance use and overdose can affect anyone, but we know it affects some more than others. And Susie will know that than other Indigenous people here. Indigenous people in Alberta and BC, where we have these numbers, are 5 times more likely to die from substance use, are 5 to 7 times more likely to be hospitalized for substance use related issues, often drug poisoning. To me, it's absolutely stunning that in this country, we talk about reconciliation, but we let so many Indigenous people die needlessly from a preventable cause. Next slide. We saw the highest number of deaths during COVID in 2021, was the worst year in record across the country. Right now, 20 Canadians die every day. It's just stunning. It's unbelievable. And what is even more unbelievable is that nobody is talking about it. We've been keeping numbers since 2016. So to me, it's painful that Danny is not in those numbers. 32,632 people we've counted since January 2016 to June 2022. Tammy is here from Winnipeg, knows that this is not a true number because in Manitoba, they, for some strange reason, don't give us the numbers. They don't even honor our loved ones by giving us the numbers. The majority of the deaths are in BC, Alberta, and Ontario, but we see increases across regions. Most victims are young to middle-aged males. But of course, many women are affected as well. In Alberta and BC, the split is 80% men to 20% women. And there are many issues that affect that, some of which related to how we raise men and how we raise boys and how men grow up to keep quiet about their problems. And men often use and die alone. The driver to the death is the increased drug toxicity that we are seeing. Next slide. Now, how did we get here? I've illustrated with Danny how personal trauma and mental health affect substance use, and I'm sure all of you have your own stories to tell. Stigma and discrimination is huge, and nothing discriminates like a criminal record. So the continued criminalization of substance use is a huge factor with the stigma. There's lack of access to treatment across the country and really sketchy access to harm reduction. Even in BC, where we think harm reduction is widely available, there are huge regional differences, especially in the north and in more remote regions. The war on drugs. We've waged the war on drugs that really was flamed by the Reagans. We've waged it for decades now. And the only thing we have to show for is more drugs, more toxic drugs, more money spent, and more people dead. Even the London School of Economics deemed the war on drugs an economic failure. And I had I don't know how I should describe it. I can't say it a pleasure. I had the interesting experience to visit the Remand Center here in Edmonton. And we had to leave all our belongings, even our cell phones, in a locker. They had sniffer dogs next to us. They spared us a body scanner. They try so hard to keep drugs out of the remand center, but they can't. If you can't keep it out of the remand center, chances of keeping out of the country are slim to none. So what about the role of big pharma? Big pharma played an important role when it came to overprescribing in the early 2000s till about 2012 when Oxy was reformulated. But at the moment, and I often cite stats from BC and Alberta because I'm most familiar with those, but also because they keep the best stats, so the most accurate, informative stats, with lots of room to grow, of course. But what BC and Alberta numbers tell us that about 95% of all the deaths are from toxic street drugs. It's absolutely not from the prescription pad any longer. And I'll show you an interesting graph at the moment. Over to the next slide. The iron law of prohibition. This term, the iron law of prohibition, what it means that is the harder we crack down with the war on drugs and the measures that come with it, the more toxic drugs get. You can watch Netflix series or even on CBC a series about the time of the alcohol prohibition. And you can see that people drank beer and wine and spirits. And when that was made illegal, we saw moonshine with all the consequences that came with having an often contaminated or toxic substance. And we repeat that over and over. We shut down opium dens. We get heroin, and eventually we get fentanyl, carfentanil. So every time we crack down, things get more concentrated because it's easier to smuggle, easier to hide, easier to move, and it comes with higher profits. Now, next to the question about prescription opioids and poisoning death. You see, this is a bit little pale, I apologize for that, but the bar graph shows the death. In blue is a toxic street drug. In green is, you see prescription drugs, and the dotted line shows prescribing. So you see that prescribing has been going down steadily since 2014. And as prescribing goes down, the toxic street drug deaths go up. Even people who had prescriptions for pain have been seeing their prescriptions taken away or doses reduced. And often people turn to toxic street drugs to manage with devastating consequences. The other question is the spectrum of psychoactive use. And that is on the next slide, Tyler. As I have explained, I have a cup of tea here, and I like wine. CCSA tells me I should have no more than 1 or 2 drinks a week. As an adult, I find that very sensible, but as an adult, I also decide to have more than 1 or 2 drinks. I don't drink problematically. I don't need treatment. And as an adult, I make adult decisions, even if they involve risks. Skydiving could be risky, so could mountain climbing. We take lots of risks as people, and as adults, we should be able to make those decisions. Whenever we talk about addressing the drug poisoning crisis with treatment, we overlook the 80% of us who actually do not need treatment for our substance use. Indeed, many people need treatment, but treatment alone does not address the toxicity aspect of it. So we have to drive that home, that the people who are dying right now from toxic drugs involve those who use problematically, but also many people who might only be a casual or occasional user, and people, tragically, people who use only once and for the first time. Next slide. One thing you know that Mom Stop the Harm, that for us, harm reduction is something that is very, very important. In harm reduction, relationships are key. Harm reduction measures include needle exchanges, sterile supplies, consumption site naloxone, drug safety education, all that is part of harm reduction, but nothing would work without the relationships. Accepting people where they're at, accepting people without stigma, accepting people without shame, accepting people for their choices and decisions, and not shaming and blaming them. What the relationships do, and I've recently talked to one of the most, in my opinion, most wonderful harm reduction nurses here in Edmonton, Marta Taylor, who tells me the best conversations that staff and consumption sites often have with people is right after they use, where that anxious moment of really needing to use is gone away and people relax. Then they have conversations about addressing other health conditions, about housing, about getting help with ID, getting help with income support, and questions about what's out there for me. What are my alternatives to these street drugs? So these are important conversations that happen when we build relationships. If we put the question of treatment ahead of the relationship, we just drive people away. Next slide. What we have to remember is whenever we don't provide safe spaces, every place becomes an unsafe place to use and die. In Alberta, about half of people who die indoors in their own home, and another 10 to 15% die in someone else's home. But when we had the SES review here in Alberta, I asked the Mom Stop the Harm families, if your loved one did not die at home, where did they die? And this is the list that I got. It's a heartbreaking list, an absolutely heartbreaking list. Because until recently, nobody died at a consumption site. We've now had reported of 2 deaths at a consumption site in BC as drugs get more toxic and don't respond so well to naloxone anymore. But if you think about this, 2 deaths, over thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths reversed in consumption sites and overdose prevention sites across this country. Next slide. When I give talks to students, I talk about overdose prevention. Now, we don't have the time to get into this here, but through Holding Hope Connect, we had naloxone training, and I'm quite sure Antoinette will set up more naloxone trainings in the future. The most important thing for you to do is to go out and pick up a naloxone kit today if you don't have one. And you can also find information under overdose and naloxone on our website. We have some YouTube videos there. Besides picking up the kit, the other most important thing you have to know, if the person can't be woken and you have even the slightest suspicion it's due to substance use, you can administer naloxone and you go through the procedure described under responding to overdose and Save Me. Next slide. Another thing we can all do is practice with the language we use and how we describe people, how we refer to people. You can model that for your friends. You can correct your friends. I remember the first time I spoke to Lorna Thomas, one of the co-founders, and said, when did your son commit suicide? And she told me he did not commit suicide. He died by suicide. We often use words that we don't think about. You know, we commit a crime. We commit people to hospital, prison, whatever. So there is judgment in the word commit. And by learning not to use words that are full of value judgment, you know, like the J word, we can convey a different message. Now, if a person who uses themselves, if they may identify with a certain term, like if they describe themselves as an addict, we respect that. But it's not the word that we should use or should use in public. The best way to approach is what's described as person or people first language. What do we do? How do we respond to substance use? This is probably a question you ask yourself all the time. And there is no magic formula. There is no simple magic formula, but there are a few strategies that can help us. If you have concerns, speak to the person, but be factual. Say things, I've noticed, you're sleeping a lot lately, you're getting up late for work and you're not really going out with your friends. Is something going on? And as parents, speaking to our children, it can be hard. Sometimes it's easier for a friend or a sibling to approach than somebody to come out to their parents. Danny came out to me when he just absolutely had no other way, nothing else he could do. When you speak to a person, be calm, be factual, and do not accuse. Don't say things like, how could you do this? I know it's on your mind, it's on your tongue, but people accuse themselves. People feel guilty and they feel distressed. We don't need to add to that. The most important thing, don't make your support conditional. There is no evidence in this world that any tough love has ever resulted in any positive outcomes. Tough love causes distress, it wrecks relationships, and then you are not there when the person really needs you. And if you have practiced tough love in the past, don't beat you up over it. That's what we were told. Let him hit rock bottom. And I thought, wow, he just broke up with the love of his life. He had to drop out of school. He'd finished culinary school, but he still wanted to do restaurant management. He had to drop out of that. And he had no place to live. That is rock bottom. I don't need to add to that. So don't beat yourself up. Move forward. Rebuild those relationships. Stay prepared and respond without judgment. The person could relapse, and then you have to have that naloxone kit on hand and that information. When the person comes to you and they need help, it's not the time to figure out how to get help. Find out beforehand. And I know it's impossible to navigate a non-existing system, but find out in your region what's available. And we have information on the Holding Hope website on some provincial resources that are available. Talk to the people in your Holding Hope group if you belong to one. Maybe they have suggestions and resources that you can inform, how you can inform yourself. Most of all, take care of yourself as well. Not practicing tough love doesn't mean we don't set boundaries. If you have younger children at home and your child is in active use and keeps substances on them, it's probably not the time to have them live with you, because you have a responsibility not only to the child who's using, but also to the little ones still in your house. If your child, when they use, or your loved one, when they use, becomes agitated and threatening, make sure that you set clear boundaries, but at the same time, help them where you can. Buy meals, buy a coat, support them financially, and people say, oh, don't give them money, they might use it for drugs. Well, of course they would, because they need money for drugs. I always, when people ask me, should I give them money? I say, don't give what you can't afford to give. But if you can afford to give them to a certain amount, support them. So they have a place to live, they have a place to eat, and some of that money might go to buy drugs because that's what they need at the moment. And if they have money to buy drugs, doesn't mean they don't have to do other things to buy drugs. I know this might be controversial for some, but really it is the reality of the situation that people live in. Taking care of yourself also means that you can join one of our Holding Hope groups, because it's so important to have others who understand you and can be there to support you. Next slide, please. When it comes to young people, as much as possible, of course, we want to discourage use. But when I was young, the idea was that no young people ever had sex. That, of course, was an unrealistic expectation. And it's unrealistic to think that no young person will ever drink or no young person will ever use drugs. So we discourage drug use as much as possible, but it's not realistic to expect for it to be that way. Stay engaged and model good behavior. You having 3 beers and getting behind the wheel and driving home is not modeling good behavior. Your children will watch carefully what you do, and your actions have to speak louder than your words. Next slide. When it comes to substance use, we put safety first, and we have to provide them with factual education. Emily Jenkins from UBC has done research on problematic substance use and how to engage young people. And young people, in fact, preferred a harm reduction approach. We know that stuff like DARE or just say no, those kind of approaches do not work. But providing factual harm reduction information that includes the types of substances that are out there, their effects and side effects, benefits and harms. If drugs wouldn't have benefits, we would not use them. My wine not only tastes good, it also makes me feel kind of a little bit more mellow while I have dinner with friends. Peers and social situations are really important. There are protective factors that can work, such as being involved in a sports activity that's meaningful, or sports or arts activity, any kind of activity that's meaningful to the young person. But if the sports team goes out drinking every time after a game, then that positive peer situation is negated. So it's important to evaluate that. And to look at mental health and the relationship to substance use, and making sure that our young people get the mental health supports that they need. This is from the Drug Policy Alliance resource. They have an entire curriculum for teachers to download and use if you have any teachers in your life. For youth and harm reduction, we really take harm reduction on a continuum. This applies to youth and for everyone. Of course, it's safest to abstain. Next, to use less harmful substances. For example, cannabis would be less harmful than opioids. To use less often, to use in a less harmful way. For example, taking something orally is less harmful than injecting it. And to never, never, never use alone. Using alone is where we lose people, because nobody is there to reverse a drug poisoning event. What can communities do? As communities, we have to demand access to evidence-based treatment. We have to focus on voluntary treatment. I don't understand how governments now are getting onto this train with forcing people into treatment, because voluntary treatment is so inaccessible. It's so hard to even find voluntary mental health treatment, substance use treatment. In Alberta, where we have touted to have supposedly 8,000 treatment spaces, and we supposedly have a recovery-oriented system of care. My friend Angie, whose son gets released from the hospital, ends up having to sit with him in someone else's house and stay with him, because there's no space in a treatment center. A space in a treatment center is weeks and weeks away. So let's build that voluntary treatment, because that is what effective. When people are willing to go into treatment and they're ready to go into treatment, it has the best chances of working. Involuntary treatment results in people hiding their substance use, and people hiding, maybe even not calling 911 in an overdose, especially young people. And involuntary treatment results in so many relapses that are so dangerous because the person has lost tolerance at the time. Be sure you support local and provincial harm reduction initiatives, because that's what keeps people alive. Here in Edmonton right now, we are trying to open an OPS in an area, an overdose prevention site in an area where there are a lot of people who are unhoused, and there's high substance use and high overdose rates. And people say, oh, this is so important, we need it. But why in my neighborhood? Why in my neighborhood? Well, because people live in your neighborhood, people use in your neighborhood, and people die in your neighborhood. That's why in your neighborhood. So be that neighbor that says yes and speak to those who say no. We need to provide support groups for people. And I know that Narcotics Anonymous has a long tradition and has helped many people. But as we become a more secular society, and as we look at different substances, it does not work for everyone. In many places, Narcotics Anonymous is starting to allow people on methadone to join the group, but in many others, they still don't. And that is just a huge barrier for people. Another alternative is smart recovery. If you want to learn about smart recovery, you can ask Antoinette. She's a smart recovery facilitator, and she even trains facilitators. You can Google it. There are groups in almost every city. It's based on kind of behavior modification principles, and they accept anyone in any stage of their recovery or wellness journey. We need to look at the underlying issues, and we look at the causes of substance use and the prevention measures. We have to really work towards upstream prevention, and that's a huge job. In my city, in Edmonton, during COVID, the number of people who are unhoused has doubled, absolutely doubled. In Edmonton, more unhoused people die than in Toronto, which is unimaginable. So we have a big job ahead to address these underlying issues. Most of all, be open and be kind, be generous, and don't discriminate against people. When it comes to evidence-based treatment, the CRISM, they provide treatment guideline for opioid use. And withdrawal management alone should be avoided, is what they say, which in other words means abstinence only should be avoided. Not only is it its effectiveness is in the low single digits. And when people relapse, they lose their tolerance and the risk is just too great. What we call opioid agonist treatment, or OAT, that's with methadone, Suboxone, that is the first line treatment that we should be looking at. Where we look at success rates that still seem low, success is maybe not the ideal work. When we look rates of people finding recovery wellness with that, it's about in the 65% range. What's in square brackets here is what I've added, because these recommendations are older. There are people where conventional opiate agonist treatment just doesn't work, and there we should provide pharmaceutical alternatives on prescription. That is happening in a few pilot projects in BC, contrary to popular opinion shared by conservative politicians. There is not a lot of safe supply in BC, but some people have access to it. There's some in Ontario, some in Atlantic provinces, some in Quebec, but nowhere near as much as we need. What about stimulants? We always get this question, and physicians tell us there are no alternatives for stimulants, which is really not true, because in the US for ADHD, you can get an actual prescription for methamphetamine. It goes under the brand name Desoxyn. Now, Desoxyn is not licensed in Canada, but we need to push for that, because if it were, a doctor could prescribe Desoxyn off-label to people who use stimulants, just like if you just prescribe off-label. But off-label means, like, for example, hydromorphone is meant to be prescribed for pain. When you prescribe it for substance use treatment, then it's like an off-label prescription. And we could do the same with Desoxyn. We just got to move on it. People who actually have ADHD, many people have a hard time, if they have a history of substance use, they have a hard time even getting ADHD medication. And getting people on those meds helps them regulate their brains, and really is a preventative measure. The other thing we need to do, we need to redefine recovery. And I have some examples here of how we need to redefine. On the left, we have Ophelia Black. Her story will be in the resources that Tyler will be, or Tyler Antoinette, I don't know, will be doing it, will be emailing out to you after the presentation. Ophelia is one of the 30 people in Alberta who has a prescription of hydromorphone as part of her opioid use disorder treatment. But the government had tried to take that away from her, and she went to court and she won an injunction. Listen to her story. She's in the photo with the dog. She kind of belies the image of the typical drug user, you know, that we like to see, like to be portrayed in media. Her hobbies are cross stitch and reading romance novels, besides spending time with her mom's dog and her cat. In the middle, Leslie McBain is talking to Garth Mullins. You all know Garth Mullins from Crackdown Pod, and if you don't, you have to listen. It's the most amazing podcast. Garth is open that he's been on methadone for 20 years. If he's on methadone, he just functions like everyone else. And I just recommend to never get in an argument with Garth, because I've not witnessed an argument that he hasn't won. He's very sharp. He's very articulate. And just a powerful advocate. If you take away his methadone, really bad things happen, and he'd probably have to turn to street drugs with all those risks. And on the right, you have Guy Felicella, another strong advocate out of BC, like Garth. Guy used to live on the street. He has a TEDx talk about overdosing 5 times before he decided that he wanted to stop using. He used methadone just for a short time. And when he was stable, he went an abstinence-based route. And now he's another powerful advocate, and he has this lovely family and 3 beautiful children. So here you have 3 examples of what I consider recovery or wellness, but everyone need to take their different route. Guy is abstinent, Garth on methadone, and Ophelia, thankfully to an understanding judge, still has access to her hydromorphone. What we do as Moms Stop the Harm, we engage in advocacy and peer support. What I do this morning is a little bit of both. I always inject advocacy, but I hope that also my message is supporting you in your role. And as members of our Holding Hope groups. In our advocacy, one of our big aims is the decriminalization of people who use drugs. And often people get it confused. Decriminalizing means the drugs are still illegal at that point. Not that that is an ideal scenario, but that's kind of, you know, baby steps where we are right now. So the drugs are still illegal, but the people are not persecuted for carrying them. And often the police say, oh, we already don't charge. Well, maybe they don't charge, but they confiscate. What do you think, what happens when you confiscate the drugs from a person who is using? So we have to stop criminalizing people who use drugs. It's happening in BC already. There is a pilot project going on. There's some information from Pivot Legal and Bandu, Know Your Rights, on the next slide. And one of the challenges in BC is it's only 2.5 grams, which is something that is being criticized by drug users, but we'll see how that unfolds. My understanding is that Toronto, in its bid for decriminalization, is going bolder, and we will see if the government will approve that. Another one of our big areas is what we dub safe supply. Safe supply is really regulated alternatives to toxic street drugs, and I like to call regulated with a capital R. It's a public health intervention, and it's not, if we do it right and we make it broadly available, it shouldn't be seen as treatment or result in abstinence at the end. It's a way to keep people safe and away from toxic street drugs. The other good thing about regulated substances is that it's about community safety, because if you provide regulated substances, people don't have to do the things they need to do to get access to the money to buy the toxic drugs on the street. On the next slide, we see the impact on the life of people who've had access to regulated drugs. Life is so much better, is what most people say. It saved my life. It has a positive influence what I can do. I have more energy and focus on my art. So providing regulated alternatives for people is not only life-saving, but life-changing and improves community safety. And I don't know what we have to do to get politicians to understand, but it's a slow process. Of course, you all know about or I'm assuming that many of you know about our Stronger Together Canada programs, really across the country, either in person or on Zoom. You have access to healing heart groups for families who have lost a loved one and our Holding Hope groups. Again, you'll get links to the groups, but you can also find them on our website. What we advocate for as Moms Stop the Harm is access to regulated substances for everyone, the decriminalization of people who use drugs, harm reduction, which offers hope and keeps people alive and well, rapid access to evidence-based treatment, treatment that actually works, upstream prevention, and meaningful inclusion in all decisions that affect us. That is meaningful inclusion, first of all, of people who use drugs, but also of their family and friends. As Caput likes to say, Caput, the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs, likes to say, nothing about us without us. Next slide, Danny. The truth is that people use drugs, people like our Danny, they're like you and like me, and they deserve to stay healthy and to have a future. Danny didn't have that chance. He is on our mind every day. And we miss him terribly. With him, laughter has left our family, and my knives are often dull. And I wonder how different the outcome for him could have been. It's our collective responsibility, yours and mine, to ensure that the outcome is different for you, for your children, or other people's children, if it's too late for one of your own. And I sincerely hope that telling Danny's story will help make that happen, and that maybe some of you will feel inspired to share your story as well. I give a shameless plug for my oldest, Cherry Mint Rose. They have their YouTube channel, and if you would go and check out their YouTube channel and maybe follow or maybe like or leave a comment, that would make them really happy. They publish videos about the intersectionality of autism, ADHD, substance use, and gender. I'm blessed to have our oldest child safely on safe supply, living in British Columbia. I don't talk about Millie's story because Millie has their own story to tell. But like so many families, more than one family member is living with substance use. I have a few resources to recommend. Crackdown podcast is #1 for me. Episode 4 features Mom Stop the Harm. The episode's called Blame. Recently, Drugstore Cowboy was reversed, and they're dealing with safe supply and what's called diversion. Why do people sell their safe supply? A book that opened my eyes to the failures of the war on drugs is Chasing the Scream by Johan Hari. Johan was just in town, and some of us got to have lunch with him, 2.5 hours of picking his brain. It was just so wonderful. A local podcast here in Alberta, Progress Report, shows Ophelia in her own words. A dear colleague of mine, Ewan Thompson, has a Substack blog where he has drug data decoded. The data is Alberta-based, but the questions he asked would apply in any province, and it's really educational to see his approach. I urge you to check out the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition and think about the upcoming stimulus conference. the film Building Hope, Substance Use in the Trades by co-founder Lona Thomas, and Filter magazine, they always publish articles about harm reduction. So, and you get all those links. They'll send out the links. In closing, I just want to thank you for being here, and look forward to what questions you have. And yeah, here are our websites for Mom Stop the Harm, Holding Hope, and Healing Hearts. And you can find us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where we are at Mom Stop the Harm. Like, comment, and share. This is how we get our message out. Thank you so much. And you can stop sharing, Hala, for the questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Petra. Right, so I'm just going into our chat to see our questions here.
We should also say that people can be giving away 3 t-shirts. They come either in black or purple. Nice people take drugs. I'm modeling.
I love it. New version to enhance zooming now, right? When we started off, it was no pants, and now it's just I'm flashing my shirt, so it's good. I love it. All right, whoops, sorry, just got to get to the right screen part here. So I know we did have one question coming in. What would you say to families ashamed of one who uses their members for substance use disorder?
I would respond with understanding. I mean, we've all been there. Obviously, if everything was peachy keen, Danny's grandparents would have known that he was using. Our friends didn't know, because I didn't want them to be hiding their wallets when Danny came for dinner. And there's a lot of stigma that people feel towards people who use substances. And I would tell the family that they understand, and explain to them that they can join groups like Holding Hope, where they don't have to be ashamed, and that there are ways of overcoming the shame, and that really the love for our children, for our loved ones, the love can help overcome the way we feel about it. And really, every time you encounter somebody who wants all dealers to be arrested and everyone thrown in jail and harsh treatment and all those things, the way to respond is with understanding. What I like to say, I understand why you would feel that way, unless you're a conservative politician and you should know better and you just, thrown out propaganda. But when you talk to families, I always say, I understand how you feel that way. I've been there. And then you can try to open their hearts with your own story, and hopefully open their minds, and maybe invite them to join a Holding Hope group.
So there was some conversation that took place in regards to teaching others about conditions versus boundaries, which is wonderful to see, as well as some sharing on nasal Narcan kits are 4 times more effective than the syringes. Continuing on, and in Alberta, it's only 1 free nasal kit a day was also shared there.
It depends on where you get it, where you get access. Indigenous people who have if you're an Indigenous person and you have a status card, you can get nasal for free everywhere. And some Indigenous people kindly share their nasal Narcan with other people. A lot of people who use still prefer the needle because it reverses more gently. But the nasal can be very helpful for some of us who are maybe not that great at needles. Like, I'm always afraid that my hands would be shaking. And I helped a friend who does street outreach reverse an overdose at -30 in a back alley in the dark. Their nasal is helpful as well, because it's just too difficult. But both are important tools, and it's not that difficult to learn how to use the injectable one.
There's some frustration shared as far as having to, trying to get into treatment and always being a waiting list. I think that's definitely somewhat everywhere, unfortunately.
Well, it's not just the waiting list, there isn't even one waiting list. Like in Alberta, we have a website that actually is quite helpful. That is quite helpful to find treatment centers. But you have to, after you go on that website and you get your list, you have to call everyone and find out, is it suitable? Would my loved one be able to smoke? I know that cigarettes kill, but cigarettes don't kill you in an instant. So why do we make people who try to kick methamphetamine or opioids, why do we make them quit smoking at the same time? It's beyond me. So it can be hard to find one where they're allowed to smoke. It can be hard to find one where they're allowed to be on methadone and Suboxone. So you call these 20 people, 20 centers, and you get 20 responses as to how long it takes to go in. It's barriers over barriers over barriers. It's not evidence-based.
It was also commented that we need safe supply for uppers, not only downs.
Yeah, that's what I addressed with the methamphetamine on prescription, that we absolutely have to push the government to license that in Canada.
I see that someone had asked how to connect with our Holding Hope groups, and someone responded right away with the link. So thank you very much. It's wonderful. I'm glad that all the work and repeated information being put out there is taking its growing its legs with everyone. That's awesome. And this has been, so someone I think just had to leave a little bit early, but wanted to say thank you. This has been really wonderful presentation, and thank you for sharing your story about Danny. And then
thank you also for all the kind comments from everyone in the chat. And as I said, you don't have to give a PowerPoint presentation to share your story. People will be moved by you sharing your story, even 5 minutes. Take every opportunity you have, because that's how we move that dial.
So someone had commented that I'm not sure how to answer the question I sometimes get. How do we not run into the same issues we had with Oxy if we have safe supply of what are now street drugs?
Yeah. The problem is that we said we had overprescribing, where really what we had is wrongful prescribing. A teenager who gets 4 wisdom teeth out does not need 20 oxys, but that's what they were getting at the time. So that is wrongful prescribing. With safe supply, we give the substance to people who actually need it. Like if I were to go to a doctor now and I'd feel I needed a prescription for hydromorphone, I wouldn't get it, because I'm fortunate not to live with chronic pain, and I don't I don't have opioid use disorder. So it is kind of a story that is always told by conservative politicians, that it will result in flooding the streets again. If we do it right, it doesn't flood the street. The other thing we have to do is give people what they actually need. If you are on fentanyl and you go get hydromorphone, it's like giving somebody who always drinks whiskey a Coors Light. The Coors Light's not going to cut it. So we have to give people what they actually need, and then they will not have to resell what they get and to buy the things they need. And to me, when somebody who gets hydromorphone resells it, is what they call diversion. Diverted safe supply is still safe supply. If you look at the overdose death rates until 2012, the graph went kind of, it stayed fairly steady with little ups and little downs. It's after 2012, after we reformulated Oxy, it went up and up and up. Danny was using problematically, and he had issues with his substance use, but he did not overdose and he did not die. It's really the toxic street drugs that has brought us the death in the numbers that we see right now. It's not from the prescription. So we have to rethink that. An excellent question. Thank you.
Right. There was another attendee that shared a bit about their situation that they've been dealing with, but their question is, how do we, or who do we contact about getting safe supply in other provinces?
Oh, wow. It's just pushing. And, and pushing politicians, they are not willing to move if they don't hear it from their electorate. You have to change the mind of every voter to make that happen. And the way I do, I thought by telling people that dead people don't recover, that should be important to them. But for a lot of people don't value, it's really sad, but it's true that a lot of people don't value the lives of people who use drugs. So to them, the dead people don't recover argument doesn't work. But the argument that my friend Ewan Thompson, how he explains it from each and every businesses for harm reduction. In a city like Calgary, 90% of the small property crime is done by about 100 people who engage in small property crime to finance their substance use. Now, what would happen if these people would have access to a safe, regulated supply? We would have more bicycles in our garages. We could keep the catalytic converters in our car. Our packages from Amazon could stay on the front step. These are the kind of arguments, the public safety argument. And I recently gave a talk in rural Alberta where I thought, wow, wonder how these people are going to receive my ideas. But people were quite interested. You could tell they were thinking about it. They were engaging. So you open hearts, you open minds, and you say, okay, even if keeping people alive is not on top of your priority, you won't say it that way, but we think it, keeping our community safe should. So I think that public safety argument is one we have to push harder. For me as a mom, it sort of feels a bit emotionally disconnected, but we have to use the arguments people engage with.
Right. So the additional comments and such in the chat window are, directly to you, Petra, as far as condolences and thank you for taking the time and sharing your story and such. So if anyone does have any questions, please do pop them into the chat window. I do have one more that came through, and that is, how do we cope with the saddest memories that cause so much pain?
It is so hard. It is so hard. I like to think about the positive images. And for me personally, doing advocacy is what helps, because I find that I bring about change. And once again, our Healing Hearts groups help so much. We need to talk about things. Society, like for me, it's been in April 30th, it'll be 9 years. And people think I should have moved on. But you don't move on from losing a child. You don't. And I'm grieving for Danny, but I'm also grieving for myself. I look at older pictures before Danny died, and I look at those pictures and I say, who's this person? This person with this carefree smile. She's not frowning. I don't know that person anymore, and I need to find her in myself. I know that Danny would want me to find her in myself. And we have to find things that bring us joy. My little puppy, who's actually, I thought she'd join in, but she's sleeping. Oh, she's 2 now. She's not a puppy anymore, but I call her that. Find things that bring us joy, but also find ways to express grief. And yeah, Susie talks about that beautifully too, about getting together in healing circles, and how healing circles in Indigenous culture can help us heal and share. So not bottling up your grief, but also looking for these hopeful moments, and not feel guilty when you laugh. I remember the first time I laughed, I felt so guilty after Danny died. But then I thought, no, Danny made me laugh. He would want me to laugh. But it is a slow process, and there is these waves of sadness. I know they will always come back, but I see them as an expression of my love. So I ride the wave when it comes. I go to a place where I can be alone and nobody could tell me I should get over it. And then I get on and I give yet another talk or yell at a politician. Well, not really yell. I try to be polite. I'm a mom.
Awesome. Thank you for being so real, Petra. It's definitely not hard, but at the same time, we have to remember that tears are not only of sadness, but of good things as well.
Yeah.
There's been another question come through as, what supports do I give my friend who lost her son 3 years ago? She has been suicidal as well, and she is really struggling.
Yeah. I mean, be aware of that suicide risk. There are really good look up resources on suicide prevention. And when you really think somebody is at risk, this might seem counterintuitive, but if a person is at great risk, asking them, have you made plans? And you know, that question, if a person has actually made plans, you can tell that the risk factor is higher, and they will need to get other resources. But really staying in touch and allowing them to be themselves, and asking simple things like, for example, rather than asking how are you doing, I feel like using an explicit that starts as F sometimes when people ask me how are you doing, like in the early days especially. But asking people, how are you doing today? How are you feeling at the moment? Those can be really helpful questions to get to the person, and also to let them know that you are always there for them, and that they can call you, you know, to tell them, if you're able to do that, to tell them, if you're feeling you don't know a way out, call me in the moment, and be prepared to get them to emergency if you have to. We've had that with a member who in one of our chats expressed thoughts that were suicidal, and somebody who knew them got on and had their phone number, got on the phone and talked to them and convinced them from afar to go to emergency.
All right, so I'm not seeing any other questions, just some direct messages to you, Petra.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for all the work that you do, not only taking time today, but as well as just everything that you've just embraced and made us all just come together to give us that platform to know that it's a safe space to talk about real things. And yeah, I don't think I could say it enough. And I know that, you know, being friends, and I'm so grateful that we have met and to be able to learn from one another. And really, we are changing the world. You know, may not feel like it a whole lot every day, but we definitely are. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. I know there's, you know, messages coming through on the chat window like nonstop. So everybody's definitely sharing their love, which is wonderful. And I love that we have this platform being across Canada, that we can definitely join in like this to be able to connect and really just share that strength and that positive and that love and support to one another. Sorry, no, not Petra. She shared her part. Antoinette is going to be following up and sending the links and everything else, so everyone has all the information today. And as a thank you for attending, we have just randomly chose 3 names of people that are that I think are still on with us today. One is Joyce Bunjay, Dave Connell, and Sarah Auger. So we'll be following up with you as well as regards to getting one of the famous shirts that Petra is wearing and was showing us to confirm as to size and color and such. So Antoinette will be following up with each of you, and I'll make sure she has those details. But thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. It is greatly appreciated, and the support is absolutely just heartwarming, and you know, it just fills my heart to see so many of us coming together. Don't forget, we will be sharing this recording on our YouTube channel. So YouTube, search Mom Stop the Harm, and you can find it. It should be there by next week, amongst any other recordings that we've also put there. So it's definitely a huge resource in addition to all the ones that were shared here today. Definitely please feel free to share it. And like we say, our social media, please like, share, comment, whichever you feel, but you know, just help us get that word out there. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. We greatly appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting, Tyler. Thank you, Susie, for giving us this wonderful land acknowledgement to begin. And thank you for all of your time and the lovely messages. Fills my heart and fills my cup. Yeah. Take care. Bye-bye.